In this lecture segment, we are talking about Charlemagne's patronage of monasteries and support for the production of manuscripts. We will focus on the plan for an ideal monastery and the author portrait from a manuscript. In addition to his extensive patronage of art and architecture, to further his mission of renovatio, Charlemagne also goes on a massive campaign of education and building. He builds 16 cathedrals. Not every church is a cathedral. Each cathedral is the home church for a bishop who has a special seat called a cathedra at the church, thus the term cathedral. And 232 monasteries, creating a huge network of monasteries across the territory that he held. A monastery is a complex where monks live, typically a place where they live separate from the regular world, but usually serving and helping to support communities. Keep in mind that we have towns in Europe, but no big cities, so monasteries form an important social skeleton, fulfilling key roles as centers for prayer and worship, but also having economic and social functions. This object, the plan for the Abbey of St. Gall, is really special. It is a drawing made on pieces of parchment stitched together and is about 2 feet by 3 feet in size. It was found by a conservator, a person trained to preserve works of art, stuffed into the cover of a manuscript, a handwritten book, where it had been reused and repurposed as filler. Initially, it was sent from an abbot, or a man in charge of an abbey, like a monastery, to another abbot. The purpose of the work of art was so that the monk could meditate on its perfection and have an elevating experience. It was never actually intended to be built, but could inspire changes to the actual abbey that would be a product of the spiritual exercise of meditating on the plan. The abbot who sent it included an inscription on it that says, "I have sent you, Hosbert, my dearest son, this modest example of a monastery, that you may dwell upon it in spirit. We drew it through the love of God out of eternal affection for you to study only," telling us that it should be used in meditation. For our purposes as art historians, it's a fascinating glimpse of a design, albeit never built, for a 9th century monastery. It specifically is a design for a Benedictine monastery, so a monastery that followed the rule of Saint Benedict. The Benedictine order was founded in 529, creating groups of monks who followed a particular slate of rules or laws that governed their daily lives. It included lots of work, especially manual labor. The Benedictines were the official order of the Carolingian Empire. We see in this plan a community that had everything it needed to survive, without having the monks need to leave the boundaries of the monastery. We see gardens for food and medicine, corrals for animals, medical facilities, a refectory or cafeteria for eating communally, as well as spaces for reflection like the cloister, the enclosed garden space next to the church. Remember cloisonne, little compartments filled with stone or glass, little rooms like this garden room. And of course, a church in the current style. The whole plan revolves around a key unit of measurement, with all parts measured according to the size of that unit, which is the width of a monk's bed, 2.5 feet. So the width of a garden path was half a unit. So there's a great deal of order and regularity brought to this plan by its being governed by math, in a similar way that we saw Egyptian and Greek sculpture governed by math. When we create works of art according to rules of proportion, we do so to produce harmonious, beautiful objects or structures, which was part of the goal here. The ordered, rational nature of the design reinforces the regularized character of Benedictine life, that by making unpredictable mortal life ordered, monks would be more likely to make spiritual progress. The monastery also includes a scriptorium, a space for copying manuscripts. In addition to wanting to create a vibrant and strong Christian fabric in his empire by using monasteries, Charlemagne also wanted to revitalize intellectual life and renew learning. His network of monasteries created many centers of work and learning. The Carolingian period sees a massive increase in the production of manuscripts, made possible by having more monasteries with more scriptoria and more monks and nuns trained to copy and illuminate texts. He also imported huge numbers of texts. Most everyone during this period were illiterate, except for clergy, meaning those who work for the church, and some nobility. Monasteries became centers for learning and repositories of knowledge from Byzantium and the age of Greece and Rome. The church at this ideal monastery is a basilica structure, with the longitudinal design and axial focus on the altar at the far end of the church. This structure then evokes the design we saw at Old St. Peter's, connecting back to the heritage of Constantine and the Christian Roman Empire. It is also a Latin cross plan, with the transept giving the structure the overall shape of a cross with unequal lengths. It has a westwork, a two-towered facade, on the west or entrance end, creating a strong vertical element. This was an important contribution of Carolingian architecture to the architecture of Western Europe. Although this was a plan for an ideal monastery that was never precisely constructed in this form, we learn much about it from the importance of monasteries and their place as repositories of learning and community support. Let's look at one last Carolingian work, a manuscript made, most likely, for Charlemagne by artists he imported from Byzantium or Italy. Supposedly he was buried with this manuscript, but that may be legend. It is another manifestation of his push for renovatio, revival of the Roman Empire. You see here a facsimile or reproduction of the Coronation Gospels. It's a large text with pages that were dyed purple using little mollusks, little creatures in their shells, that were crunched up so they would produce enough dye to color the vellum, the calfskin pages. Imagine how many little shells it would take to color all of these pages purple. Think about how many times we have seen emperors associated with purple, Justinian wearing purple at San Vitale, for example, and then check out how much empty space there is around the images. This is what we call conspicuous consumption. So the owner of this book could afford to waste the expensive purple pages and have empty space. So this is definitely a status symbol, and it very much speaks to imperial identity, and especially Christian Roman emperors. So this object resonates with Christian Roman imperial power. If we look at a single page from the text, we see further examples of renovatio. The iconography is a depiction of Matthew, the author of the first gospel, a type of image called an author portrait. It was a Roman type of iconography. We can see a similar image in this depiction of an author from a home in the Roman town of Pompeii. Matthew's chair, toga, and bookstand are all items that appear frequently in Roman art. Surrounding the image in the border are acanthus leaves, a typical element of classical decoration that we saw used on Corinthian capitals. In addition to the iconography looking back at Roman precedents, so does the style. This is not a Byzantine, elongated, otherworldly figure. This is a grounded, naturalistic figure that seems to have mass and convincingly take up space. He is calmly writing his gospel as his clothing reveals the form of his body in a classical way. His face is modeled in gradations of light and dark, as the artist used light and shadow to create form. It's a classicizing figure showing the influence of classical, especially Roman, style, but serving a Christian purpose in depicting not a pagan author, but a prophet, another hybrid work of art, and another example of the renovatio that characterized the Carolingian period.